I think
Do you want to get started or?
yeah, sure.
Or 2
Maybe,
minutes?
yeah. Well, I'll get started slowly and still wait. Maybe 2 minutes. Yeah, that's usually if it's all right with everyone. Okay, all right. So can you hear me? I guess since we're kind of, if you don't mind, you can come close, or I mean, I can also travel. But the thing is, I have to kind of swing in between. So, like, it'll be better for you. I don't have to yell. First of all, thank you for coming. Um, Imral and I, we didn't really formalize a format, but I really think this needs to be done more. This needs to be done. By this, I mean these discussions around writing, scientific writing. And we can do more of this, perhaps. I mean, and I'm kind of, again, I'm not scripting this at all. I really want it to flow from my own thoughts, the way I think about writing, and hopefully that'll be some help to you. So welcome. My name is Arya Basu. I'm as some of you may already know me, some of you who don't, I'm a pretty, I don't want to call it an incoming because I'm already here, but I'm pretty much a new assistant professor in the computer science department. And I'm also a research fellow at the Emerging Analytics Center. So it's a very cool spot to be in. I'm between research, teaching, and some service. So this would qualify, although I'm not just trying to do my responsibility. I also like what I'm talking about today. So this kind of comes, this is a topic close to my heart. And full disclosure, I am a terrible writer. That is why I'm doing this, because I really think writing is, the reason I call it a whole new level workshop is because everyone gets a writer's block. Also, we think that we are writing correct, but sometimes, just like a soundboard, you need people to read your stuff before you get published. And in my line of work, that's called peer reviewed. So anytime, I don't know if you know, or you may already know this, although there's a chat, feel the same. Yes, the feeling's mutual. Anyway, yeah, so I guess we can get started now. 3 or 2. So let's get started. So today, let me finish off my thoughts. So I'm a terrible writer, and I feel like I constantly have to refine my thoughts to get a better output in writing. And the reason I said that, like, writing in unto itself is a sophisticated art form, because if you think about it, there's a whole bunch of neuroscience behind it, a whole bunch of psychology associated with it. I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm not a psychologist, but I can already feel the reasoning is there. Meaning, so think about it. Our thought processes are random. If not random, they're chaotic. Have you ever tried, in other words, have you ever tried to become thoughtless? That's almost impossible. I've read somewhere that ancient monks could do that, but that's a sheer matter of practice and discipline. But becoming thoughtless is really hard. So my point there is, no matter what you think, or no matter what you're working on, there will be a constant bombardment of thoughts in your mental stream, if let's call it a stream of thoughts, right? And then when you start writing them, they're out of order. This happens to most of us, if not all of us. And my point here is, the overarching point here is, when you start writing your thoughts into a cohesive fashion, it would not come out as cohesive at all in the first place. That's called refinement. That's what, and this is what I'm only talking about writing, and then we can get into scientific writing, which is even more hard, because for the simple matter of fact is, it's rewriting, it's reshaping, it's writing in a format that is less vague for most of us. So imagine, so the idea is that you have to write your thoughts in a sequential, or almost in a flow-like pattern, where if someone else outside your domain expertise is reading that paper, they can get a gist of what you're doing. Now that's hard. Now remember, you're not only writing for native English speakers, you're writing for international peers, which means you have to cross that boundary that is called colloquial. Like, so in other words, it's phrase. You should not write cut to the chase. That's a phrase mostly popular on the Western front of the world. Meaning, yes, I do understand what that means, but you cannot use informal phrase or phraseology in a way that most of the other people won't understand. Or let's say, I was fan of the word far cry, right? So I would just say, oh, this and this is a far cry. Well, you have to think about it. Someone in the continent of Asia would not, well, nowadays it's so globalized that they may understand, but you have to also take into account that what you write has to cross boundaries, cultural and geographic. So, which means you have to write in a fashion that is not too flashy, but also sticking to the basic, tenets of, I would say, simplified writing that cuts across all these boundaries. All right. So, yes, explain like I was 5. Yes, yeah, indeed. But also remember, I emphasize the word or keyword cohesive, flow. These are all important. So today, actually, I have not prepared any slide. What I'll do is I'll show you what I worked on as my dissertation in back in the grad school. I'm an alum of University of Georgia, so I'll tell you the basic story of what I did, and then I'll show you my dissertation side by side, so you know how that flows, right? I don't know, and you can tell me later, but I think I have paired my presentation, my final, dissertation defense very closely to my dissertation itself. And you can hopefully can kind of see the flow in there, and that'll, hopefully that'll make sense to you. So I'm going to start, again, a very gentle and I would say fast overview of what I did. So as a researcher, I delved into a lot of maze navigation. What I do, I'm basically a human-computer interaction specialist or researcher, and I dissected deep into human spatial decision-making in immersive virtual reality. For those who don't know, well, you already know the term virtual reality, but I think I can get to that pretty quickly here. So basically, it's the problem of surrounding someone with the simulated world. Every bit of that world is what you control, right? So it's simulation, but it's also immersive. So I'm going to quickly say, so this is how I got started. Not too important about the timeline, but just so you know, I started back in 2009, did a bunch of stuff, but this is where you should focus. So this is closely related to what I wrote about in my dissertation. So I built a ubiquitous VR system back in 2012, started running user studies with VR mazes for successive years. And then I joined another university back in Atlanta. Anyway, so this was my problem. I'm gonna kind of these are all like no audio video clips of what was I dealing with. That's it, probably 10-year-old me in a way. I had long hairs. Anyway, my point there is, at the time, we are working with very, I would say, obnoxious and wired interfaces. A lot of it is, as you can see, we have head-mounted displays. These are, in a nutshell, we don't have to get into too much details of what these are, but imagine these are apparatus for conducting research, but they're wired and they're obnoxious to human comfort. They're heavy, they're bulky. You have to wear a lot of devices, and most of the time they fail because of the connected parts, right? So overall, it's a system design issue, right? It's more than computer science, it's more computer engineering at some level. And things here get interesting because you'll see, so just put a pin on that thought, right? I started with difficult hardware setup and configurations that are not conducive for conducting experiments for large-scale user studies, right? So that's my scenario, right? We have these problems, infrastructure is heavy, set of space is a constraint, yada, yada, yada. I mean, all of these were real research questions 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago. Again, without getting too much detail into my own dissertation, I had to design my own hardware at some level, which means looking at the current iterations of hardware design and then coming up with something new. And I'm kind of skipping some of my, these are all like studies in the past. So jumping straight to that system that I built, it's called the UCAVE, and it stands for, it's basically a ubiquitous wearable virtual reality system that we designed at the University of Georgia. You can see its components are all like 3D printed, put together in a hackneyed fashion, has some tracking option, has the render platform out of your general iPod Touch. The idea was to bring down the footprint of an expensive VR setup to something like under $100 a day. That's like amortized over time, but that's the idea. Like, can we do that as a question itself? So here's what I really want you to focus. Okay, so this is the end product, right? This is what we made partial contributions to the field by coming up with our own system and then deploying user studies out of them, right? In a nutshell, that's what I did. I mean, well, if you want, I can go into a little bit more details, but let's just say we came up with our own hardware design. We ran a bunch of user studies. We found, compatibilities and non-compatibilities, and we basically summarized all those findings in my dissertation. By the way, I'm going to step out just a little bit because we are getting into the weeds now. I'm just going to quickly go to my humble website here and show you the dissertation. Here's also well, I'll talk about LaTeX as a tool, like, the stuff that I used, but let me go to the table of content actually, real quick. Yes. Okay. So see, when you're writing something like the dissertation, I mean, a dissertation is a long, lengthy document. I mean, mine stands at 165 pages of constant drilling out. This is the mind-numbing fact. It's not the length of pages, it's rather how can you be consistent over time in your writing. So my point is, you see in my table of content, can you see my table of content, by the way? I mean, I can expand. Okay. So like, this is a standard, PhD doctoral dissertation. You can scope it down for a master's dissertation too. But the idea is that you write a lengthy document that has pockets of chapters or pockets of subsections where you go in too deep of a problem, right? But then you'll also have to scale up. That's the other aspect of writing. It's not just enough to keep writing cohesively. You need to also gauge what is needed and when to stop, and how do you like really reel back. It's someone wrote something like navigating a maze. Yes, that is true. That is, I mean, well, writing is exactly like that. It's a bunch of dead ends and you have only one target. You sometimes go in a rabbit hole that you want to crawl out of and then get back on track. It's an iterative process. It's also a lot of, again, just putting down your thoughts in a cohesive fashion, and it doesn't come easy. Anyway, I hope with this structure, I can at least belabor my point. The point is you start with a problem, one problem, or at least I can go to that problem real quick. You see, my problem is only a couple of paragraphs. I mean, right? It starts here. It's probably a page or a page and a half. That's called problem definition. Any paper you write, anything you do, let's say your dissertation or your master's report or anything, you have to come up with the problem domain. Again, what I'm today talking about is not akin to writing an op-ed or writing a blurb on your social media. That's completely different style of writing, right? Where you have the whole world to watch. This is more targeted for a more nuanced and scientific audience. More importantly, your committee members, if you're a PhD student, you have a doctoral committee. If you have a master's, if you're on a master's track, then you have a master's committee. The committee is usually comprised of 3, 4, max 5, and then you may have external committee members as well. But that's another topic for another day. See, whenever you start any documentation, anything that is deemed as scientific, you have to start thinking, what is my problem definition? And this is where you start framing the problem, because the rest of the document is gonna always revert back to this common, like this is the common core. This is what you're trying to solve. And this is what you may have a solution, you may not, but that's the other tricky part. Let's say you don't have a clear-cut solution. There is a way to write about it. So don't get disheartened if you don't get the results you want. Sometimes you don't. And that's also I would say, finding unto itself, right? Okay, good. I'm not keeping track of the chat. Imral, do you want to keep track of the chat, and then if anyone has a question. I think Mr. Warren has a very good points being there, being highlighted there. So thank you. Okay, so this is like your problem definition. So what do you do once you have that? I'm going to go back to the table of content here real quick. Sorry, I'm jumping a lot. It's a long document. So then you introduce the problem. Now what? Then you have to kind of start finagling around a potential solution, right? The potential solution is what you think you could do, you can come up with. And then we get into more, dissertation statement, overview of the solution, what you did, what you could not. You kind of summarize. The first chapter of any paper or dissertation is always the introduction. And this is not even the abstract. I mean, that's also something that comes early on, I think. Yep. The abstract is also a super condensed summary of the paper. So abstract, let me start with that as well. So whenever you're writing an abstract, you get to jump directly from your one-line problem definition to the solution you propose, right? You can go directly. There's no need to cover the background. There's no need to really repeat yourself. It has to be succinct, and it has to be direct. So always imagine whenever you're writing an abstract, you're giving the very ultra high 30,000 feet view of the paper, of the document in mind and question, and you're compressing it super, super hard. Like basically you straight away delve into the problem, you cite, you qualify. Okay, it's not enough to just say this is a problem. Let's say if I said math is hard, that is a vague statement. Of course it's hard. Then if you just said, cryptography is hard to crack. Yes, of course. See, don't say things that are also obvious. See, this is the beauty of writing scientifically. You cannot talk or write in hyperbole. Let's draw another distinction. Talking, like the way I'm talking right now, if I were to write a document about what the presentation itself, I would not write like this, because verbal communication is vastly different than writing. Verbal communication from a computational standpoint is verbose. That's why we have the term verbose. It's too much. We say many things. We may not mean directly all those things, but we say many things to pad our argument, right? That's why we have debates. That's why we have, imagine if, let's say, presidential debates were to be summarized in a paper, it wouldn't be that long. It would be problem, solutions. That's it. I mean, but that's uninteresting because we need debates. That's belaboring the point. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. My point is, do not ever confuse the two. If you think you are a good, I guess, orator, like a public speaker, do not assume that you're also a good writer. There's no correlation. Yes, there may be things that I don't know of that I cannot really frame, but I always thought speaking about something is completely different than writing about something, specifically in the scientific domain, and or otherwise too. I have not delved outside of scientific domain, so I've not written many pieces like op-eds and other things. Anyway, back to so abstract is that super condensed thing, right? Then you go to that, like I was saying, introduction, where you introduce the problem, and this is the equivalent of it, right? So see, my problem when I write about it is like a page and a half long, whereas in the visual domain, this is the problem right there. 3 videos sums it up. You have difficult inputs, you have unimmersive displays that are not truly immersive, and then you have infrastructure footprint, which is hard. like, heavy infrastructure footprint. See how visually I can condense all of that into just three pictures or three, let's just call them videos or animations, right? And so that's the other thing, slides versus writing scientifically. Yes, whatever we present is a very condensed, super, I would say, glossing over the fact, because that's the other counterpart, right? If you have a scientific document that you're writing, do not make your presentation the one-to-one of that, because that would be silly. Also, you would run out of space. So I'm always of the fan. This is a side notation or side talking point, right? Real quick. For presentations or something like this, when you're talking, you're condensing your problem definition or whatever you found into slides, make it one slide. Definitely, or not more than two. Also use bullet points as well as visuals that are not too cluttery. This is just, again, like I said, a side thing I'm just sharing. Also make sure the contrast is right. This is what I learned as an HCI, I would say researcher. You got to think for the public, which means, see, if I open up the slide, it's easier on your eyes. I think it's easier on your eyes because it has a black, dark background to white or light text color, right? Also, try to provide as many links you can, because you can click them. I think dark mode, yes, it is very helpful for the eyes. You can read it, and do not clutter. I mean, I kid you not, because people don't read. The active attention span of anybody watching anything on YouTube or even reading your slide is less than 30 seconds. So you got 30 seconds to really convince. Again, I'm not trying to oversell this idea. You already may know this, but make it as short as you can, bullet points, and talk more when you're presenting, which is the exact opposite of what you're doing in a document. This is where you belabor your point, but do not bore your audience with too much details. That's why I call it its art, because you have to imagine writing a book. You don't start with the climax or anticlimax. You can do that. Some people have tried. It's an experimental thing, but the usual flow is you start creating the backdrop. You lay out the land. It's called suspension of disbelief. You look it up on Google. There's a thing. Whenever people, there's a lot of psychology involved in writing and reading, by the way. When you read something, you can pretty much tell from the onset that you are like you start reading the book, and then you go at least beyond the prologue, and then you go beyond the first chapter. You can already tell by then that if you like this book or not, because you know what? It's either gonna intrigue your suspension of disbelief or not. Meaning, by suspension of disbelief, I really mean when you read any book, anything, you're in the matter. You're either in or you're completely out. There's no middle way through. That's how you know that book is for you or not, right? As a writer, you got to start kind of convincing your users, your readers, your audience, that what you're describing is not only interesting to you, but also could be potentially interesting to the general public, right? Why should they care? See, when I first started writing all this, the problem is, like I said, too much infrastructure cost, too much work to make it work. I'm quoting my advisor, Dr. Kyle Johnson from UGA. He always used to say, it's too much work to make it work. And, we cannot do this out in the wild. Remember, this is for those who are in this field of virtual reality and graphics. There's a very popular term, a device called head-mounted display, which basically means you wear these goggles and you are inherently inside a different simulated, artificial world. And all your senses are kind of embedded or designed to be embedded in that world, right? It's easy to talk about, but so hard to recreate that thing. And also 10 to 15 years ago, it was so super hard to do it because none of these devices were cheap. The lowest, I would say the entry-level devices cost back then $10,000. Now we have the commercial devices like Oculus, HTC Vives, and others, like for gaming, you also have the famous PlayStation VR I mean, all these franchisees, commercial game companies and producers of entertainment slash gaming, they're coming up with their own off-the-shelf devices. But back then, for me, it was a legitimate problem. How can I get this footprint out there? Like if I wanted to do VR, get immersed in this wonderful afternoon out there safely, of course. There's a lot of logistical reasons too, like why you don't do VR in the outside world or in the wild, so as they call it. But that's a different point. But see how I'm belaboring I have one. I hope this is what I'm trying to give you. I have a singular point that I can talk and talk and talk. And now, once you get there, you're primed to write. This is the state of the mind you should have. Actually, this is something I'm kind of also reverse engineering a little bit. Once I started getting excited about all these things, thoughts came into my mind. By the way, a good writing tip is always, I'm going to show you a silly thing here. Let's see if I can get to that real quick. I say this to my students as well, all the time. Try to develop a website or something where you have a bunch of these silly mind notes, as they call them, and timestamp them. The reason, I'm going to blow them up a little bit here for you. Look, this is like I'm really opening up myself, because this is out there for the public to view, but I'm also being very honest with you. If you read this paragraph, it would not make sense to you. Read it. I'm just going to say, I'm going to read one thing from 2013, 2:13 in the morning. Is the lack of standardized hardware and limited accessibility to users. That's not even a complete sentence. What I'm really trying to give you here is like, these are random thoughts that made sense to me. I was wise enough back then to keep them around and timestamp them in a way, most of them. And then when I started writing my dissertation, these all culminate. I could take them and formulate them as argument pieces, right? Like, even though this one-liner make no sense, you know what it is talking about? It's actually talking about the lack of standardization across the board. See, the way I rephrase that line makes more sense to you, at least to me when I'm speaking out loud. Lack of standardization, like meaning, okay, let me give you an example. If you had clocks with weird clock hands for everyone, could you tell time universally in a normalized fashion? I know there are time zones, of course, but let's say the unit of time was different. Like say Imral's 5 minutes is 17 minutes for me. It's scaled differently. That would not make sense. That's why we all have standardization, which means the hand clock and the second clock and the minute clock. I'm sorry, not clock. The minute, the second, and all the hands of a clock, basically, and the hour, our hand, they are all standardized, no matter if you're in India or in Philippines or in Jakarta or in anywhere else here. The hands of the clock are always telling, maybe they're telling different times in different time zones, but they're manufactured in a standardized way to tell the time equitably, universally. This is that one liner that means. See how I can expand it? Could you see that? Like I took one line and I phrased it and rephrased it, and I probably produced 3 or 4 lines out of that one line. This is what I really mean. Your thought processes are ultra compressed and disoriented, somewhat chaotic and random. Put them in somewhere, save them, because those are the things that will be helpful when you're writing, when you're looking back at them and trying to kind of form an argument or formulate anything. I will take a break to sip my coffee. If you have any question, let me know. Sure, go ahead. What's your name? Okay, nice to meet you.
Thank you for sharing with us paper presentation. So far, it's going well. My question is like, is there any best tip or any kind of scientific writing methods, generally scientific and used, or how to develop those structures of scientific writing paper. And my last question, not least one, how today you talked about that you need to orient your writing manner so that you know how to deal or handle those editors, etc.
Yeah.
My question is how to deal with those reviewers and editorial criticism. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, sorry. That's a really good question. But let me start addressing your first question, or at least I think your two questions are kind of, first two questions are related, and then the second one is the editorial aspect of it. Okay. To be honest, yes, you can find many stuff online. I never went that route, to be honest with you, because I don't think writing can be, it can be structured. Yes. So if you simply ask, what is the structure of any scientific document? I would refer you to my one dissertation or any paper that I write. I'll here. I have a work in progress paper. Why don't I share that? This is, by the way, a paper that I'm working with Jayashree and Jahed, who's not here. They're two of my master's students here. Okay, what do you see here? Look at the structure. There's a title, there are author names and everything. Then you have some sort of a visual, and it's the same as my dissertation, only it's much more compressed or much more scoped or scaled down, because I'm not writing a dissertation. I'm writing specifically about a topic. A dissertation is a culmination of larger topics, right? You see the distinction? It's like going to the very sub folder to one of your file structure as one file, that's one paper. And then collecting all of that folder and the hierarchy is the dissertation. That is a very crude analogy I'm trying to do. So this is like a very specific question. So this question is privacy concerns in VR. The other thing that just came to my mind is writing the right title. Actually, you should start with that too. Sometimes I struggle too. What's the right title? How do I sum up my paper in very less words or even lesser words, right? Because you cannot have a big sentence there, right? It's a constant struggle. Evolve is the right word. Like you have to constantly say, what's the right sequencing of word that kind of captures the essence of the paper? And there's no direct science. This is what I'm trying to add. So this is your question too. Is there a generalized? You can look up any paper and deduce a structure. The structure is abstract, introducing the problem, giving the background literature. So you can take a look right there. I'm presenting it right there. There's a background, and then you straight away get into your solution. So for in this example, Jahed is here. Thank you. In this example, I have the abstract and the introduction. The introduction is more like, here's a problem, like privacy in VR is a problem, what others are doing, and how it falls short, in your opinion. You have to be a little bit opinionated, but the thing is, you cannot make a politics out of it, or you cannot just emphasize this is the only way to do it, or the rest are all garbage. Never do that, of course. And always use third person, plurality, meaning don't say I's in any scientific do. It comes off as arrogant. Don't say I did this, always, even if you did it alone. I have single author papers, but I never said I. It just rubs off the wrong way, Yeah, you cannot do that. There's some niceties here that you have to, decorum is the right word. You have to maintain some decorum in writing. But regardless, that's the structure. You introduce the problem, you introduce the backdrop, you straight away then not somehow, you have to connect the background to your proposal. So let's say your background says people in your community did X and you're proposing Y. So you have to justify why the Y, all pun intended, is different than X. And why do you think your approach is building. So here's the politics. Never say my solution is the best solution. Don't do that. Again, I'm actually sipping into your third question. See, arrogancy in writing, people are arrogant. People can get very arrogant actually in their writing, but those are not the examples you should follow. Never try to qualify your approach is the best. Be a little moderate. Like, okay, professors and lab XYZ did this. My lab did this. I think there's some things that we did better, something that they did. I mean, always be kind of deliberate in saying, I'm respecting others' work because they also are doing hard work. Also, here's my solution that I think could be better in certain ways, and here's how. You see how I framed it? You can also simply say, oh, all of the rest is garbage, mine's better. You can do that. Even if you mean that, don't write it. That's the art. You have to kind of start. How do I say this? It's very human. You cannot be jealous. You cannot be arrogant. You cannot be selfish in your writing. You don't bring those things. It's like traits that, I don't know, it flows. Try your best to a better person in writing, if that's what if you know what I mean. Like, you got to be respectful of others. You have to. It's also a matter of tonality. You have to sound optimistic. You cannot just write, oh, so you, as an example, you would never see climate scientists write, oh, the world is going to burn. What do I care? They won't say that, of course. That's not the way. I mean, that's true ultra pessimistic. You got to be optimistic. You got to be measured. That's I'm actually bringing out not just the structure, but the qualities of a writer that you try to bring to your writing. It's the writer that comes before the writing. Remember, I mean, okay, if you're writing together, that's even harder. But let's say the single use case of you writing your own paper. Say, that's why I started with dissertation, because it's only one author. The dissertation is a reflection on how you are as a person. I'm telling you, because that's true. It's like if you put your heart and soul into it, it will reflect you as like that writing would reflect you as a person to some extent. It's not, again, I'm not trying to, let's say a 65-page long document could be better than my writing. It's not the lines of, okay, in my field, we're scientists, so we qualify something as lines of code, LOC. That may not be true for other fields. But lines of code, numbers of pages are no metric. They are one thing to qualify. Of course, I'll tell you this. In a dissertation, in classical dissertation writing, for PhDs specifically, I think the standard average is you got to get to 150 pages. You know why? Because it's 5 years of work. Here's that structure that again, I'm kind of going back and forth a little bit here. If I go to my tables of content again, or table of content, sorry. Yes. How many chapters I've got? I've got 8. Leave the first and the second, because second is review of the literature, so background. So 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, they're all studies or related to what you did. I have those many chapters. So these are years. I can exactly say, remember, I go back to my slide again. This timeline is important because this is where I'm saying I started running studies in mid 2013, 2015, went on to 2016, and also continued two more years after that. This is exactly this. Chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, they all flow. That's what I mean. It's a chronology. You don't get to chapter 8 without completing chapter 3, because if you did that, you would not even understand how I went there. It's a sequence. And, I'm a terrible writer. I told you before, so I cannot do nonlinear stuff. Some people can do. Those are masterful writers, but I'm not writing a novel. Also, I'm not writing a murder mystery. So it doesn't have to be that way. Mine's a very simple, follow the line. It goes in a timeline, in a chronology, right? So chapter 3 is 2013. Like, I can give you the exact time. Chapter 3 is 2011 to starting of 2013. Chapter 4 is 2015, 2016, 2017, and follows 2018, and then 2018 is when I graduate. You see how my life's work is right in those chapters? And even if you're not a PhD student, fine, master's, you have 4 semesters, you still do a good bit of work. Even I'm not touching base on undergraduates, but undergraduates also do capstone project. So I'm kind of trying to go across the board here. I'm not specifically speaking to PhD students or master students, or I'm trying to speak to anybody who wants to write scientifically. Yes, go ahead. Sure.
Does it always has to be that all the information of being dissertation, the experimental work, or you can have some kind of reviews, literature reviews?
Yes, yes. So that's chapter 2. You write it. You have see. Sorry, you're
So
complete.
you have some bunch of literature reviews that you have done in the past.
Yes.
Can you put all those together and put them in the dissertation?
That's
or
what I
does it
So-
always has to be purely experimental work?
So the simplest answer is, you have to put, well, it depends. Okay, this is where you have to ask how much. You can go back 100 years in your field. If you like, let's say if you belong from biology or chemistry, you can go as back as Darwin's time, but is that needed? That's a very subjective thing. That's based on what you're proposing, what your problem statement is. But yes, no, you have to have, see, how would you qualify where you stand in the long lineage of scientific inquiry? I'll say that again. Why do we need review literature or background review of the literature? What do you mean literature? It's not English literature. By literature, at least in the scientific domain, we mean all the previous work related to your problem definition that has been done. It's your duty to find that out. That's what Google Scholar is for. So you go there, do a bunch. See, it's also not that as simple as just Google Scholar, like Googling all that work. You have to go to conferences. You have to meet your peers. You have to meet your like the living legends of your field, and then the people who are in queue. It's always a pipeline. If you think about it, there are like top professors and researchers in your field, but then there are people who are doing really good work, and they may be the next generation. And as a grad student, you got to go there. You have to meet people. You have to know what they're working on. And then also share your ideas. Conferences before COVID, now even after COVID, are the best way, unfortunately. I really, I tried doing it online during COVID. I had to, we all had to, but it's not the same. There's something about physical. I'm not saying that if you can make it, if you cannot make it, do everything to go there. No, not really. But if you can, if you have the opportunity to go safely if you can, because you cannot replace that physical interaction over a cup of coffee or over a bagel. I'm just saying that breakfast to evening. I don't know if you have ever been to a conference yet, but you will see it's a whole day event for successively at least 3-4 days. It's half of a week. And those half of a week are super condensed. You have workshops, you have tutorials, you have papers, you have posters, you have keynote speakers, you have dinners. Go to dinners, and actually randomly when you sit with the same people or community of scientists, you'll share ideas. So hence that plus Google, like going on Google Scholar, and actually sit down with your advisor. You really need to see another thing nobody talks about. Read your advisor's dissertation. You have to. Actually, if you can go up the chain, read your advisor's dissertation. Advisor's dissertation. It's called there's a funny, it's called academic lineage. You're like your grandmothers and grandfathers are there who have done their dissertation. Their children are your advisors, right? In a way. So it's funny to think about like that, but no, I really mean it. I mean, because this is how you'll get the feel for what your field is doing. How do you know where your field is going? You have to look back to look forward. That's a famous saying here, right? And in there, Philip, there's a saying like that. Looking back to look forward. Oh, sure. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I wanted to chime in before we drift.
Yeah.
Because I think his question touched on this very closely. Which is an overarching thing, I think, but I struggle with scoping for kind of trying to provide background knowledge, particularly in like doing literature or something like that. Understanding how broad of a background you get. So if I'm going to understand, and dissertation is usually kind of focusing on a very pinpoint complex subject, how far into the background is one of the things that so, for example, if I talk about 3D printing, do I have to talk about the material science behind 3D printing in addition to the engineering and the computer science, and then delve into the background? At what point is it too many kind of recursive layers to be explained?
That's a very excellent question. Thank you, Philip, for asking that. I think there is no right answer, to be honest. And the difficult, the hard or the struggling aspect of what you're explaining is, or trying to explain, or trying to do is, like you said, scoping out. But how much is too much, right? It depends on where your field has been, right? Okay, it also depends on what's your problem definition is about. So I can only speak to what I did, and maybe let's say, hopefully that relates to your problem. But that's a fair question. If you're talking about 3D printing, how do you go to lathe machines? Do you go to as back as CNC machines? I mean, you gotta like, I'm of the school or of thought where history plays a part. See, I mean, that's why I brought up this slide, or actually this part of my dissertation. It's the review of the literature background. I started to the source. This is Ivan Sutherland with his first head-mounted 3D display. Why? Because I'm trying to build a head-mounted display that is operational outside. See, this was not, but this was ahead of its time back in 1965, I believe, 68, to be precise. So yes, that's one way to gauge whatever you're proposing. At least mention its source. You don't have to really finagle too much there, because most of the people in your community, let's say in the 3D printing community, already know that. So there's no point in that, but at least it shows you're serious and you know your roots. So I think go as far as back you want, but make it make it even if it's a larger tangent, make it somehow connected. This is what I'm getting at, by the way. And this isn't the overarching thing too. Whatever you write has to flow nicely. See, if you go through my dissertation, I'm not trying to make you read 165 pages, but if you gloss over it, the way I have the background, it started with that origin story. Okay, Ivan Sutherland did this, the impossible. Can you imagine this guy did this back in the day without computers? 1968, the first head-mounted display. I mean, I wouldn't say without computers, but not in the form that we imagine now, right? That is a hard thing to do. And in my mind, what I'm trying to do is also hard, at least back 10 years ago. How do I take that same essence and redo this for the newer generation? So Philip, that's the thing. Like, if you're proposing, I know personally, because I'm in your master's committee, so you're trying to, I have that luxury. So I can kind of expand on what you just said. I know where you're coming from, because you're asking if I'm implementing a new slicing algorithm. So you start with, what are slicing algorithms, right? I mean, again, loosely speaking, maybe that's not what you do, but let's say if you're doing that, what are slicing algorithms? What do they do? What are their limitations? That's where your hook for, like, the limitation is where you expand. This is where you zoom. Say, you nitpick on things like, okay, this is working, but let's say there's a difference between resin-based printing and ABS plastic, right? And let's say your slicing algorithm does something fancy where now you can address a solution that was a problem for both of these materials. Let's say you had something fancy going on, something sophisticated going on for different materials, but you address that with your slicing algorithm, saying that my slicing algorithm is generalized. It can tackle this material, it can tackle this material. But then you also draw back a little bit, like, why does that matter? You see how I'm framing this? Like, you gloss over things, but gloss over things that are important to set the context. Let me try and explain this. Have you ever read Agatha Christie? She does it really well. Anyway, read Agatha Christie. She's one of my favorite. It's murder mysteries and novels and all that. She's British, but the way she sets up the environment, that's the intrigue, right? Okay, for Philip, the slicing algorithm is the actor, and as the problems with it are the villains, or the bad actors in his context. Again, I'm trying to make it kind of relatable in a story-like fashion, where he would need to address what's the problem and how my hero in that context, his new and improved slicing algorithm is tackling the bad factors or the bad aspects of 3D printing. Anyway, that's just a very general statement to say, but going back specifically to your answer, you hit upon those things that are critical to your problem statement. In my case, HMD, well, first of all, if Ivan Sutherland did the first HMD, so I started there, but then I slowly said, look, the field has improved over time, but even back 10 years ago, only NASA and the DODs and the really well-funded labs of the world could afford such a equipment, right? What can we do to make it outside, like take it outside the controlled lab-like setting and do it outside? I wanted to, take this and reach out to the common people, to the public in a way. I cannot beat my own drum, but here's an interesting fact. My work or our work, hey, I did something wrong. Do not say my. That's the thing. It's a constant thing. You always tend to think it is my work. It's actually not yours if you really think about it, because other people have worked on it, and you're only expanding it further a little bit, hopefully. So our work, what was that back then was, how can I take this outside the lab and really make it useful for people in the classroom or people with, let's say, kids with special needs, all sorts of things. Like, I'm really thinking social or the societal and the humanistic side of things. And that was a research problem unto itself. Not anymore, but again. So a long-winded way of saying, Philip, it's not as hard, as easy as you think. You just have to constantly try and read your own thing. That's the other thing I was going to say. I don't know of a great tool, but you have to read your own words. Maybe speech, like dictation tools, but that's the other thing. The dictation tools are kind of robotic, so they don't come off as natural. But if there was a tool I don't know of that could read your writing to you in your own voice, maybe that would be nice. Or have your friends, your partners, or anyone you're close to read your work and read it out loud. You'll spot immediately things, oh, wait, it reads wrong because I was thinking this, and then the writing says this. That's another, like, one of those things that you have to, otherwise. So that's why, my advisor used to say, rehearse what you write, rehearse, try and say it out loud. It may come off as wrong, but that's okay. You're practicing it. So, did I answer? I mean, I think I kind of touched upon what.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it is to some extent kind of a subjective thing, which I think is kind of the point you were towards. I feel like the key thing that I come to for it is that it's me trying to analyze what the target market or the target person for this to read this paper is, and sometimes that's hard to determine in the academic community because it could be someone that's very familiar with your field or someone that's still probably academic but distance from your field, and it's hard to fit in between those two.
I absolutely agree that nobody has a solution for it. To be honest, you don't control your audience, right? So the general, I would suggestion is to write as generally possible. See, this is where I think the other aspect of scoping in and out comes into factor. How much detail? So let's say math. If your slicing algorithm is too math heavy, which it is, right? Do you really have to make people understand the math that deeply? Or is it sufficient for others to just gloss over the algorithm and know the highlight points? I really think you should do both, in case if someone is more math heavy and wants to understand the nitty-gritty things of things. This is why also, by the way, in this day and age, you don't have to write everything. You can also do repositories. Like if at least in our computers, in the field of computer science and something related to coding, you can have your work published as repositories, something called GitHub, where you put all your work for others to cite or even download, right? So it's more than paper. It's more code, it's more results. So Philip, if for all intent and purpose, could make his slicing algorithm public, open source, so that everyone can take a look at it and actually critique and build upon it. That's the other aspect of being non-selfish, meaning publish your work and make it open to the world, because you never know how beneficial it could be to someone in the remotest possible corners of the world, right? And to your that particular aspect, scoping in and out, do both, unfortunately. How else would you address it?
I think that's a good answer for me. I appreciate that because I've been in mindset of I should go in the middle. So it ends up being a compromise.
Don't do compromise. Here's the thing, it's your own writing. Can I sum it up with, do not compromise on your writing. You don't need to. That is the art of writing. That is why I'm speaking. You don't need to go through. Well, if you want it, you can have an expanded version on your own and you can put it on your website, sure. But that's the art of writing, right? I mean, you can compress to decompress. I don't know if that makes sense. Meaning you can form it. It's all about forming. It's called wordsmithing. You say your points over and over again. You'll start. It's like blacksmithing. You know how you know about blacksmithing, right? You beat a metal into shape. It's the same thing you're doing. You beat your own thoughts, again, non-violently, beat your own thoughts and keep hammering to a point where it forms and looks nice and reads well. Go ahead, Jeshri. Well, you can do that with a family member. See, that's the thing. To go that deep and line by line dissection, well, you need someone special because it's a matter of patience too. And if you have someone like that, that's even great. It's called soundboard, meaning you need someone to read and understand and kind of point out things. Be careful in use. So this is the psychology of things, right? Don't give it to a family member. Why? Because they're biased. They may be biased that they don't subconsciously. They don't. No, this is science of things, right? So I'm just saying. I'm not saying this is a bad thing. You may end up in a false position because they cannot say something bad or critique in a way where they think it's going to be harmful. I don't know. It's complicated. So also run it by actually, if you can, you run it by your peers. Is what I meant. Peers meaning people, like if I'm a peer of Philip, I would run it by him and he can safely say, look, this doesn't read off well to me. And they can, take them out for lunch, dinner, and then of course, be gracious that they're reading your work. But I think, yeah, exactly. Yes, family members can really get into the nitty-gritty, but it can be a distraction too. And they're subjectively biased at some level. So be careful in what you're doing, all right? And yes, you have to make sure at least your sister is in the same field. Not now, my sister is a she's a sociologist. Good luck. I cannot explain her things like HMDs. I mean and she cannot explain me her things. That's always sibling rivalry a little bit. Yes, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Start. I'm sorry. I went a little bit more. I think we had Q&A anyway built in. So let's ask, open it up to others. I'm actually going to go. So one thing before I start answering a question, I also wanted to also give you a peek on writing is one thing, but then formatting is the next workshop, to be honest with you, because that's where I'm getting into late-ish. You can do things in Word. Word has gotten much more better over the years, believe me. But there's something about late-ish, and those things are paramount, quintessential to writing clear, crisp, formatted documents. Now, this is more into the realm of a little bit of coding, but so Imral, we'll fix that sometime, maybe later the semester, or even summer if you're around. What I really want to say is like, okay, once you know how to write, or somewhat know how to write, you need a great tool to match that potential. Late-ish is your tool. You know why? Because you have ultimate control on every white space, on every inch and nooks and crannies of the document. This document is the result of me going, full on control over fonts, spacing, this timeline thing. You cannot do that in Word. You cannot. This timeline is so specific. I don't know if you know this, if you're noticing this. This timeline is actually scaled. So if you actually you were to measure this, it would literally go like, yeah, 1916 to 1929, that gapping is accurate. It's an arc. Okay, treat your document as a blueprint. This is a blueprint. It has to be built in a way that you can give it to your students. If I give it to Jershi or Philip or Imral, they can take it and run with it, and they can have their own timeline right there. That's the beauty of LaTeX. You can formulate once and let it go, and it'll work for most cases. So it's the coding of writing scientifically, I guess, if I were to call it. And if I'm just take a moment here. This is how it looks. I mean, this is my first chapter. This is a .tex file, tech file. And you can see subsections and sections. And, this is, for example, this is my dissertation statement right there. Highlighted. Yeah, this is LaTeX. Yeah, or LaTeX. You need to know LaTeX. I cannot mince my words anymore because I don't want to, because the thing is, this will, once you know, I mean, it's a little bit of learning curve. And that's why I would like to offer more into specifics of how to write a document with LaTeX. But you see, I mean, my point here is, look, you can get into the like nooks and crannies like this, like for defining a figure. You have ultimate control. Like if I can show you, I don't know. It's not, never mind. It's because there's so many displays, but which one do I get to? But see, look at this. Width equals to 0.8 of the line width. This is a relative calculation. I can say go 80% of the line width, and it'll place it right there. It's so precise. So that's why I made the comparison with architecture. This is it's like architecting a document. Right. All right, let's open up for Q&A. Sorry. We went a little bit further, but I think it was all well-rounded. See, that's why I didn't want to make any slides. There's no point in making slides because the sequence won't matter to you. Instead, I wanted to talk and show my work.
Yes, I have a comment on your LaTeX. First, I want to say I've really enjoyed your talk. It's tremendously inspiring.
I like Mr. Bourne's compared LaTeX to right. So she's saying it's trough and yes, nrof, nrof. However, other tools of creating graphics can be snapshotted and erased into Word. And some might compare LaTeX to cutting down a forest with a scalpel. Yeah, I think that's a great. I'm gonna quote you on that.
Are you able to hear me?
Guys, if you have any questions, unmute yourself or write in the
ask
chat.
any questions from the remote side.
Yeah, you can unmute yourself or write in the chat.
Yeah, I'm unmuted, but I don't think I'm being heard. I'll just stay in the chat. Thank you so much.
Can I show you one more thing? Let's see if I can archive. This is another work of mine, but it's very interesting because this is more on the lines of what you can do with LaTeX. Although I'm still kind of bad at it. Again, I'm like you. I'm also. People are speaking, but they aren't hearing. Oh, can you hear me? Can you speak something?
I can hear you very clearly, and I'm very much enjoying your well-prepared and fine presentation.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate
And
it.
I've kept a stream of consciousness notes to myself to try to summarize these gems that you have presented so that I can send it to myself later.
Right.
And so with the LaTeX thing, I have been involved in that community and used those tools, but I've found that I've specialized my use of LaTeX, particularly to the typesetting of linear algebra and mathematics, for which I get a lot of leverage relative to the learning curve. And then I revert to other graphical tools which I snapshot and insert in Word as figures and
Right,
tables and so forth. And I find that that gives me the most bang for a given amount of time.
right. I agree. And can I show you something more weird in a way? So
Please.
this is an example of LaTeX with handwritten notes. I mean, this is something I put on archive, and it's not a real paper yet. But I'm also like I'm sometimes artisanal. I like a well-written note. You know what I mean? Like it kind of reflects your thought processes, and then there's nothing like it. So what I did, I actually went complete 180 opposite. So instead of really typesetting it with beautiful math packages and everything, I started drawing my own thing directly onto a PDF and made it a figure out of it. So that also works if you're I mean, my handwriting is not the best, but I got the most interesting compliment because some of my committee members, when looked upon, this is, by the way, this paper is one of the hardest possible imaginary problem that I had to solve. This was, I kid you not, this was a gauntlet thrown at me by my advisor. And he actually told me that this is like an unsolvable problem in a way. If you can solve it, I think this was also, he was playing mind games with me a little bit. But at the same time, I think he set me on the right track to really think outside the box. And all this outside the box thinking made me realize, you know what, I can actually draft my own handwritten notes and math, doing the math, right? It's like proofs, right? I can do it within LaTeX and use like for example, the covariance matrix equation that I've written here, it's my own handwriting. I tried my best to write it in a clear and concise fashion. And you know what? My committee said that this is a more personable document that anyone can produce. It's that thing. There is degrees of this is your own work. So you're the best judge on how to present it, but do it in a way so that people can read it. And then the best thing you can do is like put it out there. So I put it out there for everyone to see. I'm also building, hey, Mr. Warren, I can take your help in kind of typesetting this a little better at some point. No. Well, here's the art of scanning. That's another topic. So, I delved into so many things. If you write on a with a black ink on a white piece of paper and run 600 DPI scans, like even if you have if you have really large resolution scanners, the more the better, and save it as a TIFF, then use that to bring it into LaTeX as a figure. And then you can let LaTeX like work with crispness, contrast and all that, and you can turn it into something like this as a note. It's the opposite of what most, so don't do this for a publication, meaning a conference would not accept this. But I did this intentionally to see how it looks, and it works fine. And if you have a really good handwriting, if your handwriting is really gentle and nice and concise, you can get away with this stuff too, is what my point is. Okay, I have 2 more minutes. One thing I would, again, I really, I cannot emphasize this more. Go and write, like you call it as your inscriptions or whatever, write and save your notes. This saved me, back in the day. I mean, all my work has actually come out of all these random thoughts. I told my students to do that, and I'm telling you as well, it's free advice. Just start, like, have a diary or maybe notes. Nowadays, you can just upload it online somewhere. So keep writing your thoughts, because though your writing is hidden, basically your dissertation, your final report, your whatever is kind of hidden in your thought process. And the more you go back to your own thoughts, because again, humanly speaking, you cannot revisit every thought you have in a span of 5 years, which is a typical time frame for PhD students here in the United States. So write and save, preserve your notes, preserve everything you have, because that timeline will serve you best down the line. 2 comments. Handwritten faster allows one to think without being incompetent. Yes, I agree. That is a fair point. Yeah, I didn't know about that, but yeah, the Alfred Canzoni, I'll look him up. Can you save all these? I guess, hold on, let me just. No, but like save all the meeting chats. I think there's a way to do it. Save chat. I'm gonna do it myself here. So that I have it. And you know what? I can send it to Imral here real quick so that you have it too.
All right, guys.
Yep.
Could you mute on the?
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate your time here and really enjoyed time talking about my writing process here.
I would like to thank all of you for joining today.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So we have multiple other workshops coming up this semester. I would like to invite you to join our other workshops and the events. We also have a bowling night event coming up. We will send out emails about all those workshops and events. And thank you again for joining. Feel free to drop off.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Lydia.
Bye. I'll see you later.